Hi, listeners. This is Nate, and you're listening to the Apolitical Podcast. Today, we'll be talking about the massive harms carried out by the Trump administration amidst their crackdown on immigration by examining the ongoing legal struggle of Kilmar Abrego Garcia. So Kilmar Abrego Garcia, right? This happened back in March. Basically, he, along with like 200 other people, were rounded up and deported to CCOT.
Yeah, from my understanding, the Trump administration, along with Bukele, the president of El Salvador, were claiming that those members were of a Venezuelan gang.
Yeah, Tren del Aragua. Tren del Aragua. And they whisked all these people away, and almost immediately, like, there was a firestorm around this specific man, Kilmar Abrego Garcia, being whisked away. And the Trump administration's immediate reaction, or at least their lawyers' immediate reaction, to say, like, oh, that was a clerical error.
Just a big whoopsie.
Yeah, oops. And it seemed like pretty quickly they went back on that. They said, actually, it wasn't a mistake that we deported him. It was just a mistake that we hadn't gotten all our ducks in a row. So yeah, we wanted to deport this guy because he's MS-13 and a human trafficker. So we did want to deport him. It was just a mistake that we deported him now, but he's already there. So what's the government to do?
Yeah, are we going to spend our taxpayer money to bring back this hardened criminal?
Right. And that was the predominant narrative. That was like, they didn't mean to deport him then, but they did mean to deport him overall. So it just kind of worked out. And it was a huge media story. This was one of the few ones in the past, like since he's been inaugurated, that's had staying power in the media. Chris Van Hollen ended up going to El Salvador and seeing Kilmar Abrego Garcia after some insistence. Like, it took some doing on his part and some pestering of the local government. And even that was kind of a weird part of the story, right? Because they staged this entire thing. Bukele staged this entire thing where there's Chris Van Hollen and Kilmar Abrego Garcia, and they're sitting around and having margaritas, except they didn't actually touch the margaritas. And then it turned out that they had like doctored it to make it look like they were drinking the margaritas. But Bukele definitely wanted this image of like, see, he's fine. What are you guys freaking out about? CCOT's not that bad. It's where hardened criminals go. So sometimes things just happen.
Well, and I want to make the point of people like Holocaust deniers do the exact same thing with Auschwitz. Like, oh, it had a swimming pool for the guards. Oh, it had this, that, and other thing, amenities. Oh, yeah, there's some torture going on, but like that's for the really bad prisoners.
So Chris Van Hollen comes back. There's some mounting pressure to bring him back. Judge Heenies orders the Trump administration to bring Kilmar Abrego Garcia back. And the Trump administration is adamant that they can't do that. They just don't have the power to do that. And there's a few problems with that. More than anything, the fact that they paid Bukele to take these prisoners.
Talk about a perverse incentive structure.
Yeah. And so that creates the problem. The fact that they paid Bukele, it creates the problem that these are actually U.S.-controlled prisoners by U.S. law. And there was a lot of deliberation on the legal side of things. At one point, Judge Heenies issued an order that they effectuate and facilitate the return of Kilmar Abrego Garcia. The DOJ did not like the word effectuate, so they argued that in court, and Heenies just changed it to facilitate. And then the Trump administration understood that as their job isn't to bring him back. Their job is just to make sure he gets back there if the El Salvadoran government wants to make it happen. So it's not in our hands, guys.
Yeah, and I even recall from Bukele's visit to the White House in April that they kept shifting the blame back and forth. Pam Bondi, the Attorney General of the United States, and Bukele both basically saying, well, it's not under our control, and like, do you really even want to like release this hardened criminal, this terrorist?
Yep. Bukele called him a terrorist, yep.
And the fact that, now with reporting that we know he's being paid to hold these I don't even want to say really prisoners, these captives, these people that are being, essentially sentenced to a lifelong detainment if they don't have a media, or even like their family making their case for them that these people are, not hardened criminals. And even if they were, does that mean that they should be deported to CICA? And
that's a good point to make too, because like there's some, I think, assumption here from some liberal media sources that Kilmar Abrego Garcia is like the exception here, right?
Yeah, I think that like this is unique, and I think that in some ways they're failing to make the case that if they could do this to Kilmar Abrego Garcia, what is preventing them from fabricating all sorts of accusations of criminal mischief against anyone?
And we saw this back when it was all happening, where there were a lot of, and following the chorus thing, I'll say it, quote unquote, independent reporters or commentators saying like, well, it's the rule of law. They get due process because that's the law. But if they get due process, go ahead and deport them, but make sure they get due process.
Yeah, like we're fine with these mass deportations as long as that they get their day in court. And what we know from previous immigration court proceedings is that often a lot of these cases are tried by the dozen, if not hundreds of people, where it's like they're all grouped together. And it's like, I think we were talking before going live, talking about how under the Biden administration, sending back, thousands of Haitians that may have not even lived there for years, if not a decade, sending these people back strictly based on their nationality.
Yep. And so, yeah, I mean, it was this entire thing, right? You had Chris Van Hollen going out. You had, meanwhile, you had Alyssa Slotkin saying like, "Oh, here's my new war plan for the Democratic Party," and that was. There was this whole thing going on at the time, and I don't know if you remember this, but there were like unnamed Democratic politicians saying like, "This is a distraction."
Yeah, you need to stop making this point so aggressively.
Yep. And this has been a larger problem with the Democratic Party, and just like, well, it's not immigration's not a winning issue. So, so we've got this problem on multiple levels, right? That there's all kinds of things wrong with this, but we can't seemingly grapple with it in an adequate way.
Well, and it's interesting because it's like, it goes back to, I think, what will be a recurring theme of this podcast is how the Democrats are afraid to get out in front of anything, because we've seen now how polling, when people see what mass deportations look like, that it's not specifically going after the toughest of the tough, the worst of the worst criminals, that it has completely flipped. Public opinion has gone largely against these ICE crackdowns, ICE being masked. Like, that is not what, a lot of Americans envision when it comes to, keeping America safe. People don't feel comforted by the fact that people are once again, just like in 2020 during protests in larger cities like Portland and Seattle and various cities around the country, where DHS, Department of Homeland Security, which ICE is underneath, were disappearing people that were inconvenient to the administration.
Yeah, Chris Van Hollen, Senator Van Hollen, said it at the time when he was asked about the whole like distraction thing, and he made it more eloquent than I ever could, which is these are politicians that are sticking their finger to the wind and seeing which way it blows, right?
Yeah, and I think that's been not just primarily our criticism of the Democratic Party, but anyone that's not, getting paid to basically be a cheerleader of the Democratic Party, or are just so, I would say, like, inclined to believe that our institutions will hold up, basically believe like, oh, this is nothing. Like, why are we even litigating this in the court of public opinion? Like, this is something we should just concede that, hey, deportations were underway under a Biden and, even an Obama administration. And if they just did it the right way,
the deporters in chief.
Yeah. Tom Homan, who is now, villain number one, as the borders are worked under Biden and worked under Obama.
He was cool back then, but now, ugh.
Yeah, he wasn't so public. Like, that's the thing, is like a lot of these things, and I think even Trump and the Republican Party have been able to target that and say the media didn't have a problem with it until we started outright cheerleading it. We started to make content out of it. They're making memes, like an ASMR video on the Department of Homeland Security page, basically being like, "Hey everybody, look at us deport these evil people."
Yep. And
We're
so
saving it.
And so Judge Henius had told them, like, you need to facilitate his return. And they basically just spent months creating excuses for why they couldn't bring him back. During this period, you had Pam Bondi, you had Kristi Noem. Well, no, I think Kristi Noem was more recent, but you had Pam Bondi, you had Stephen Miller, you had what's her name, Carolyn Levitt, all kind of just villainizing him on very public platforms, right? Basically going out into public spaces, public spheres, and saying like, no, this guy's an MS-13 criminal. He's a human trafficker. He's a wife beater. We saw some of the evidence that they were using to kind of indict him in the public court of opinion, right? There was that police report from 2019 where an officer used a gang informant to kind of paint Kilmar Abrego Garcia as a member of MS-13. The problem is that was solely off of somebody else's say-so. And then this police officer was suspended and then also prosecuted for professional misconduct. And no criminal charges ever came from it, right? Nobody ever prosecuted Kilmar Abrego Garcia for gang activity. So why are we using this report that produced none of this?
Well, and I think, to a broader point, I think that the way that the liberal establishment fails the people is, whether it's police or whether, let's say, for example, it's Israel, they regurgitate in the form of like, oh, we're reporting that, police officer says, and that to a certain crowd has credibility, even though we know they lie. And they will often, if they, make a mistake, just like, with the Trump administration initially saying like, oh, this was an administrative error.
Right.
They'll double down and say, oh, no, actually, he's a gang member. And because of this, this dubious report by this police officer, that we take that at face value. It's a fact.
Right. Another thing that happened during this time was Carolyn Levitt brought on Patty Morin. And this was particularly underhanded. So Patty Morin is the mother of Rachel Morin, a woman from Maryland that was murdered one morning while she was jogging by another immigrant from El Salvador. And so essentially what Carolyn Levitt was trying to do was say, hey, look at this aggrieved mother of a victim of a immigrant from El Salvador. And now just think about Kilmar Abrego Garcia, right? It's inherently kind of racist, right?
Yeah, it's it's the association of like, I think it kind of goes back to like how the Republican Party has, I think back to like the Willie Horton ad of like, oh, look at these ultra violent people. And like, Trump has been saying this about this, like, oh, these people are born this way. They are. It's not their circumstances, it is their DNA, their genes that leads to this, criminality. And, I think he's often like fantasized about like this criminal that like, oh, they could slit your throat and, butter their bread with the same knife. Like,
and I did a video on it at the time because I thought what Carolyn Levitt, what Patty Morin were doing were, imagine being a mother of a victim, of a murder victim, and using your child's death to do a racist smear. Like, to me, that was like beyond reprehensible.
Well, and we've seen, I think there's been at least a handful of examples where the Trump administration has used a victim of a violent crime to promote their nativist and racist and xenophobic worldview. And those families have even come out and contacted and said, hey, whether they're directing it directly to Trump or the broader right wing, of saying, stop using, my loved one's death, a tragedy, to promote this racist narrative that, you're more likely to get killed by an illegal alien.
I want to say like Laken Riley's family didn't endorse the bill being named after her.
Well, and that bill in and of itself, if you look into the details of it, is problematic in and of itself, because even if you're charged with a crime, then you can be put into immigration processing.
Yep.
So it's not even like, oh, this person has absolutely been, convicted of a crime, therefore they should be deported to their country of origin. It's not even to that extent. Now we're just saying, oh, anyone accused of a crime, if their legal status is in question or is in process, they should just be outright deported, because they shouldn't be here in the first place, because being here is illegal, despite, it being a very minor crime to cross in the first place or to overstay your visa. They like to liken overstaying a visa or crossing illegally as that is akin to murder. That is akin to thievery of the country. You're taking, and we talked about how Stephen Miller has been one of the purveyors of this this notion that, oh, America would be a prosperous land for American citizens if these illegals weren't stealing from us. And I just have to point out that that is the exact same stuff that the Nazi propaganda was saying about the Jew back then. Hey, the schools, the hospitals wouldn't be overcrowded without the illegal alien or without the Jew in Nazi Germany's case. It is a one-for-one repeating of that same rhetoric. And I think I just want to make this point briefly of that the terminology of illegal, these people's existence in and of itself is illegal to these people.
Right.
And that is the beginning of an ethnic cleansing, of this dehumanization. Yep. I believe there was that Border Patrol, I don't know if he was like a regional director, overseer or whatnot, but used the term cockroaches in reference. And we know where, in reference to the Rwandan genocide, that was a big purveyor and, a foreshadowing of what was to come. When you start referring to human beings as animals, as insects,
as illegals.
Yes, as illegals. All of these things are leading to, hey, well, yeah, Kilmar Abrego Garcia got sent to a torture facility, but didn't he kind of like deserve it? Because maybe he just shouldn't have been here in the first place.
And so really what it does is it makes clear that like what we're experiencing right now with Trump and his lackeys, this isn't a project of today. This is a project, I'm sorry, of 1996. This started with Bill Clinton putting immigrants on the chopping block. This started with Bush calling them illegals. This started with Obama's mass deportations, our deporter in chief. It's really ignorant to think that like this is a Trump problem, and if we just get Trump out of there, that makes things better. Because he's just taking the reins on a project that is now 30 years old.
Yeah, and the thing is that I think that in not just Trump, but over these last 30 plus years, there's been how should I say this? They're trying to break down the media's will to call out what it is for what it is. They have to now investigate each of these claims. They have to say, oh, that's not true, rather than just outright proclaiming, hey, just by saying these claims of, oh, they're terrorists, they're murderers, they're this, that, and the other thing, they're saying, oh, we need to actually investigate this. We need to take it seriously. And I think, even Clinton, like that era of politics of, oh, we need to be the serious adults in the room and we need to, tackle these problems. We can't just let, they genuinely believe, the Democratic Party, that this is why they're losing elections, is because they're not able to be seen as being
hard on crime.
Yeah, hard on crime, as if that's going to solve the problem.
Right. So yeah, we had all that happening, right? We had Pam Bondi demonizing this guy on TV. We had Carolyn Levitt bringing on Patty Morin. And the White House just insisting like there's nothing we can do. We can't bring him back, right? And then in June, they're like, we're bringing Kilmar Abrego Garcia back, but just so we can prosecute him. Right?
Yeah, for all that human trafficking he was doing.
And so there's two big problems there, right? So first off, were they able to bring him back or were they not? Right? And then it creates the other problem of like, okay, so you're going to bring him back just to prosecute him, certain that you're going to send him back. What if you can't prosecute him? They were basically functioning on this idea that his conviction was a done deal, and it was just a formal process at that point. But that led him into a lot of other legal issues because they simply couldn't make a case against him. They lack the evidence. But one of the big problems of this case is that they've been able to kind of continuously villainize this guy in the court of public opinion. Which is their long game here, right? They're not actually angling for a conviction. They don't have the mechanism to secure a conviction. But what they want is they want the pressure off their backs. They want to make it obvious that this person should not be here, despite all evidence.
Yeah, and that whole, like, I think that they're relying on very much rather than being able to, they are trying to try him in court for criminal acts. But even without that, they can then argue, well, he's a national security threat. He might not love America after the way we've treated him. And that's, how is that even valid? He should still love America and definitely don't wear a Chicago Bulls hat because that could be affiliated with gangs, okay? And I think that the refusal of the Democratic Party to really take up this and say, hey, yes, we can focus on this specific case. However, we also need to be, championing or like uplifting the people's voice that this is affecting that might not be as brave as, Kilmar Abrego Garcia's wife, who is actually fighting against the federal government, filing lawsuits. Not everyone would do that because under threat of, hey, well, let's investigate you. Have you ever done anything criminal?
And that's what it comes down to, right? Like there's a profound issue here of political will, where many in the Democratic Party don't want to fight this fight. They don't see it as popular among their constituency, so they fail to make the case for it, which leaves the stage entirely abandoned to Republicans, right? It's this weird thing where by deciding something is not an important issue, you make it so, right? You create that reality by simply making that decision. And this is the Democratic problem, is they just won't make the case. They'll call this a distraction. They'll call trans people in sports a distraction.
Well, and I feel like, yeah, there's a refusal of, arguing other than on their terms. Like it's, oh, well, he's not a criminal, so therefore he shouldn't be deported. What about, the other thousands of people that are going to be deported that don't have any criminal claim? And are you just going to accept that, oh, we've deemed them a national security threat based on what? It's like this coverall of, hey, we can prosecute anyone that we deem inconvenient that might fight against, hey, this totalitarian crackdown, whether it's, in your city, whether it's in Los Angeles. They are trying to enforce their will on us. And I think the Democratic Party refuses to acknowledge that this Republican Party views anything short of a total, complete victory as a loss.
Yep.
And so there is no compromising with them. There is no saying, hey, yes, let's work together to try to deport people that are a threat to the American citizenry. They believe that anyone here illegally or, seeking asylum in and of itself is a threat to us.
Let me make one correction there. The class of people they believe don't belong here is much larger than even immigrants, right? We saw that footage of Donald Trump saying he wants to send domestics to CCOT.
Yeah, the homegrown.
The homegrowns, yeah, that's
yeah,
right.
we need hey Bukele, we need 5 more CCOTs.
Yep.
Because we're sending Americans. And I remember during the election arguing with people saying like he will deport American citizens because he was saying on his campaign website, hey, anybody that, might be in support of Palestinians. We saw during the presidential debates, he used Palestinian as a slur against Chuck Schumer. Like, anyone that doesn't, what was that recent thing where it's like now, if states support BDS, like there's a continuation and a sliding scale of like people believe that like, oh, if we just go along to get along, they'll stop. And I think it bears repeating. Without total victory, which I don't even know if they necessarily know what that looks like because they would keep asking for more.
Yep.
And there's not, there's no way to deport 10 million people. They think it's like more like 15, 20 million. There's no way to deport that amount of people without killing them.
Right.
Like outright, that is what's going to be the end result. And the Democratic Party in large is afraid to be portrayed as hysterical. Oh,
right.
Like, J.D. Vance is out here saying, and, the broader right wing is out here saying, you care more about illegals than you do your own country people.
So, Kilmar Abrego Garcia is back. A few interesting things happen. They want to prosecute him. His lawyers argue for him to stay in prison for 30 days because the DHS has straight up said, like, the moment he walks out of custody, they're just going to deport him again.
Yeah, and we see like a recent development is there was reports that he might be sent to Uganda, and now in the last 3 or 4 days, Eswanti. I don't even know how to pronounce it because I've just been reading articles about it, but and I just learned today they're in coordination with 53 countries that many of whom have very, very questionable human rights records to hold these people. And I think it's the
country is Eswatini. Sorry.
Eswatini. Okay. It's the continuation of when Trump won his election, private prison stocks soared because people knew, whether you're a dictator like Bukele of El Salvador or, your core civic or geo group, hey, there's some money to be made to get rid of the undesirables.
Yep. And so yeah, that's the ongoing thing right now is that the Middle District of Tennessee federal this is the federal prosecutor reached out to Kilmar Abrego Garcia's lawyers and said, hey, it's customary for us to do a plea deal. And the lawyers basically said, okay, we'll do a plea deal, or the only plea deal that we're interested in is the one where he goes to a Spanish-speaking country in Central or North America, South America, sorry. Or no, Central or North America, that was right.
Well, and you brought to my attention how there's many people in the commentator space or even like political pundits on your news stations talking about like, well, that's better. It's better to, get sent to Costa Rica than to a torture facility. And yeah, sure. But to claim that as a victory in and of itself, it is not. Because I'm sure if you were to ask Kilmar Abrego Garcia, hey, would you rather stay in the United States with your wife and child, or would you rather uplift your whole life and move to Costa Rica? I would bet 100 times in a row that, hey, I want to stay where I've established my life for over a decade. I'm not wanting to actually begin again. Like, yes, it is preferable to being disappeared. And I don't give a damn if the Trump administration or anyone takes issue with, oh, well, technically we know he's in around, Uganda, Eswatini, he's in that jurisdiction, but this is how it begins, is that, hey, these people that, the general public might not have sympathy towards, people that are here illegally, those people start being sent away, disappeared. And it's, as long as that is permissible, it will continue, and it will continue to seek out, like, I think in a way I think the Republican Party is trying to make, China or Iran like the big bad, right?
Yep.
But I don't think that's effective as it was in a pre 9/11 world.
Yep.
And so now they're saying, hey, you need to be afraid of these Americans, even these.
Yep.
And we're not even going to call them Americans anymore. These, trying to think, these dissidents, these people that, they don't
leftists.
they don't want to keep them.
Communists.
Ugh, these icky people, these people that, live in these rat infested cities. And, I think that's the main thing that I think is a really good point to make, is that the media class has failed us over and over again by saying, hey, well, maybe Portland or New York City or Chicago, yeah, like crime is down, but, we're even seeing now, like the mayor of Washington, D.C. is welcoming the presence of the military, saying, oh, well, actually, it seems like it's working, versus like recognizing, like, how sustainable is this?
Right.
Is this a breakdown in democratic norms? Does this look like, a North Korea? Or, I think that it's so interesting that often we have to, especially in the media class, the imagination is like, oh, this is like China, or this is like North Korea. It's like, no, America has a history of actually doing this, of cracking down on civil disobedience.
It's so basically Costa Rica said, like, oh yeah, we'll take Kilmar Abrego Garcia, and that was a condition his lawyers laid out, was going to a Spanish speaking country in North or Central America, and in turn, the federal attorney for the Middle District in Tennessee was basically like, okay, we'll send you to Costa Rica if you admit to doing all these crimes.
Yeah, make a plea deal.
Right. Which is insane, right? They have no evidence of him doing all these things. It's what they're doing is they're trying to save face. Like, they've made all these claims, they've demonized him, he's beat them at every turn in the most, I hate saying beat them because he's still in this position, right? But he is still, his lawyers have still shown their case, the federal government's case, to be extremely weak. So they're trying to save face. They want him to admit to doing these things so that they get their win and he gets to go to the country he wants to. Not really where he wants to, because he would probably prefer to stay here. But, it's this whole thing where they're just trying to save the face on all the claims they've been making for the past now 6 months.
Well, and what's really interesting is that I just learned today that you can't file a defamation suit against people working under the federal government. And I think in and of itself, that is dangerous, because, now we're seeing, a breakdown of judicial norms, of not commenting on a current case. They're outright saying this man needs to be not even tried. He needs to be convicted.
I just want to point out, like, what we're seeing isn't a breakdown of judicial norms, right? What we're seeing is the system working as it's been designed.
Yeah, and I think that is a good correction, in the sense that that's often what we hear from, people that are institutionalists, whether they be liberal, even Republicans, that are saying, like, oh, the institutions will hold up. This is, I think it is important to make the point that we have been going under democratic and institutional backsliding. However, a lot of these systems are built in order to encourage a Donald Trump figure, even a George W. Bush character, who back then was arguing that, hey, we should be able to do unconstitutional things under unitary executive theory.
Yep.
And I even saw recently that, when it comes to Trump's deployment of the National Guard, John Yoo, who was the legal scholar during the Bush years that was the main purveyor of unitary executive theory, is going on these news shows saying, well, is crime really up in these cities? No, but people feel that way. And it reminds me of how, going back to like even the presidential election with, they're eating the cats, they're eating the dogs in Springfield, Ohio.
Yep.
They don't live in a reality-based world. And that did start to come to be under like a George W. Bush, Karl Rove talking about like basically like a reality-based society is not how we're going to win elections. And the Democratic Party is clinging to the last grasps of a reality-based society, of a mutually agreed worldview that doesn't exist.
It's never really existed.
Yeah, and it's like this, they think that, it reminds me of, I think it was Nancy Pelosi talking about like, oh, we just need a strong Republican Party. And it's like, or, like there's very few people, if any, on the Democratic side, like saying the Republican Party should be abolished, versus Trump and his lackeys are out here saying basically like the Democrats should be in jail. Like,
right.
They should all be imprisoned. They should have their citizenship revoked because they hate America.
Yep.
And we can't even make the argument of like, they hate America. They hate the way that things have changed post 1960s. They fundamentally want to, as Trump does with, the tariffs or various other policies, he's like, we just need to go back to like the 1880s.
Yeah. But I also want to talk about, because you talked about the unitary executive theory, and I think this is something that's championed by Clarence Thomas, right?
I believe so, yes.
And I want to talk about the courts, because I think this has been like, for me, we've talked about this. This is something that is a very sore point for me. Is there's this tendency within liberal media, within the Brian Tyler Cohens, within Ben Meiselas on Midas Touch and Legal AF, and even David Pakman, to talk about how like the courts are holding the line, right? But that's a lie.
And I also feel like what I've seen from the very little that I've looked into their content, it's like, oh, it's just the Supreme Court that is, fucked up. But
the thing is like the courts are largely allowing Donald Trump and his administration to do what they want. And what we're hearing about are just the few like procedural snags they're hitting. Like we look at what's happening with Kilmar Abrego Garcia, and we look at like Judge Heaney's, right? And we say like, oh God, look at the courts just doing what they can. And like, that's the exception. That is like the one of the few handfuls of instances we have of the courts actually working against Trump. The only other major one I can think of is like Boasberg. And that's also kind of a funny thing in that like Boasberg is a like hard C conservative judge. And probably this is just an ego thing, right? When a judge is told they can't make their own judgments. We tend to think of like the judicial branch being like the last holdout, and it really, really is not.
Yeah, and it just amazes me how, like there's like, oh, they are able to condemn, let's say, SCOTUS, right? But there are hundreds of federal appointed judges that were appointed in Trump term 1 that ultimately do believe in this sort of, wishy-washy, whatever the president says has now been deemed constitutional, and we will find any sort of legalese that we can to back that up, because in the end, disagreement within the MAGA movement is treason to them.
Right.
We saw this during 2020 in the election, where it's like a lot of the county election officials were Republicans, were MAGA people, were people that supported Trump and actively campaigned for his reelection, and were thrown on the coals as, hey, you guys are just liberal activist judges. And that's the thing, is like, it's never a Republican being an activist judge by supporting their interpretation of the law. It's only being used as an attack one way. And
and in that way, like only against like really what are lukewarm pushbacks.
Very lukewarm. And like, I think that, with the Kilmar Abrego Garcia case, with the deployment of the National Guard to LA, we're seeing that whenever there's a slight snag in their policy agenda, and granted, it's not even necessarily a policy agenda, it's because that would be voted on in Congress. They're mandates, essentially, that there's no real pushback because, yeah, there's a slight hiccup, and then they run to the Supreme Court and say, hey, can you make an emergency decision on this?
Right.
And we know which way it's going to go 6-3 on a majority of these issues.
But no, there was that one time they ruled against Trump, and so they are principled, Magnus.
Yeah, it's actually it's a very balanced court, and only the crazy lefties that wanted to pack the court, that was not going to be a good idea, because if Biden packed the court, what if Republicans did the same thing? Like, there's
and speaking of Biden, speaking of packing the courts, that's really at the heart of what I keep saying, right? Is that this is not the system failing. This is the system working exactly as it's been set up. And Democrats have neglected every step of the way to make it better.
Yeah, as intended. And I think whether it's the court, whether it's Roe v. Wade, they need something to run on every midterm, every presidential election, rather than actually doing something. Actually making things, solidifying these things, while the Republican goal is to fundamentally reshape not just the judiciary, but the executive and the legislative branch and society as a whole, American society as a whole. And we fail to, there's very few and far between, like, whether it be, Beto O'Rourke, who's not even in elected office, saying, hey, if you're waiting for a constitutional crisis, it's here.
Right.
Whether it's a JB Pritzker saying, like, there needs to be mass civil disobedience in the streets. Those are not being viewed as leaders of the Democratic Party.
And speaking of which, like, yeah, so we have JB Pritzker, a billionaire who has done wonders for his state, who is saying these things, and yet we have the liberal base championing fucking Gavin Newsom.
You better get on board, or like
the guy who literally went on an interview and said Trump is the true socialist of our time.
I actually just saw recently Mamdani was in a CNN interview, and basically, I do applaud his charisma and the fact that he was like, I'll debate Donald Trump. I love that. But they were saying, like, oh, in a debate with Donald Trump, are you guys really that different? He took a 10% stake in Intel without recognizing that, Mussolini, the not necessarily the creator, but the first iteration of fascism, was saying, hey, fascism really shouldn't be called that. It should be called corporatism, because it is the binding of the state and free enterprise. They can't say that. They fear the retribution of a Trump administration. You see, whether it's CBS, settling on these lawsuits when they could have won.
Right.
And they're not willing. They want to play ball. Yep. They want to, what is that term? Like, concede in advance. They don't want to ruffle feathers.
And so the funny thing about Gavin Newsom, I mean, aside from the fact that he's not even a liberal.
Are you saying he's not it? He's not the sexiest man you've ever seen?
Something about his voice just does it for me. It's this thing where this argument keeps coming back up. It's coming up with abundance. It came back up with Kamala Harris. It's this idea that Democrats, the plan with Democrats is that we first consolidate power, and then we use that power for the powers of good.
For good.
And we keep ending up at that first spot, right? Democrats can consolidate power sometimes, and that second part never comes. And that's the game they're playing right now, is they are angling for keeping seats of rallying behind who they think will win in 2028 instead of rallying behind who will do and say the right thing. It's this dream of just consolidating and then doing right. It's marginalized folks just need to wait their turn. Immigrants need to wait their turn. Trans folks need to wait their turn.
Yeah, it will come eventually. And if you just quiet down, and what's really interesting is you can find online that was not even necessarily like, I don't want to position it as strictly a liberal position, but that was the same talking points about slavery, about the civil rights movement. Like, hey, you guys are just pushing too hard. Meanwhile, you can have Trump meeting with people that are outright saying like, we should kill the Democrats, but we can't even say, hey, maybe Trump should be in jail. Maybe, or hell, even like he could have been, like Jair Bolsonaro was prevented from running for office because he staged a coup. We can't even do the legislative necessary things to protect the democracy because we go, well, we sure wouldn't want them to do that to, Biden or, a Newsom. Like, we fail to recognize or to constantly call out that there are co-conspirators in the government.
Right.
And there's more.
In the aftermath of the 2024 election, we've kind of just glossed over the fact that him not being in jail was not just a matter of like fate. It wasn't just an accident that he never went to jail.
Yeah, it goes back to that point that we've had, whether it's, the Kilmar Abrego Garcia thing or, the National Guard being deployed to Democrat governed cities, is that they refuse to have the political will. It's like, well, if we just go along for these next, 3.5 years, Trump will be out of office and then we can make our case to the public. Versus like, oh, hey, you're basically saying, like, I don't understand the conceptualization of, hey, if we just are Republican light, the people might vote for us, rather than saying, hey, what they're doing is abhorrent and we're going to say that, and we're going to say, hey, they're weird. We're going to say, hey, this is a fascist movement, and we're not going to concede, and we're actually going to, motivate the base. Because I think that there was a big focus post-election about, granted, there was a big swing from 2020 of various groups of people, especially young people.
Well, and speaking, sorry, go ahead.
I was just gonna say that the Republicans were giving a vision of, even if we can't do this constitutionally, we are giving you a vision of a better world. And, I think that we're seeing that now with the reaction of like the abundance crowd. Like, oh, we just need to basically do Trumpism, but just a little bit more liberal.
And I was going to say, like, in the aftermath of the 2024 election, you're talking about like the demographic shifts. Like, Trump won decisively, and we don't have to talk about turnout. We don't have to talk about like how much energy was actually there, but he did like readily beat Kamala Harris. And so it's really weird in the aftermath of seeing people say like start doing like election denials in Trump fashion.
Yeah, I did see that. Like, whether I think it was the continuation of like the assassination was fake in Butler, Pennsylvania. Like, they couldn't accept that, hey, maybe more people are more willing to like sacrifice anyone and everyone, even if that's, their neighbor, their landscaper, their close friend. They're willing to sacrifice those people because they are getting squeezed economically. And the thing is that in the grand scheme of things, Americans are a very affluent society. That doesn't mean but most people want to take part in that affluence. And I think
Right.
that's where that abundance is coming in, to fill that gap, rather than saying, hey, how can we, as the Democratic Party, encourage, labor unionism and try to actually get a fair shake for, the working class people. It's like, on various policy platforms, basically the Democratic Party has said, oh, well, we can't do that because, maybe, let's say with Biden's, not Supreme Court, the Supreme Court ruling against him as far as like nationwide student loan forgiveness and debt relief.
Yep.
Like they refused to keep fighting that fight. They said, "Oh, well, our hands are up." The institution said no, so we're just going to be adults and take that loss. It's like the Republicans under Trump's leadership, but even before Trump, like I've said, now twice, of like they don't view anything other than a complete capitulation by the liberals, the Democrats, the media class, unless they're outright saying, Donald Trump and the MAGA movement is God's greatest gift to earth.
Yeah.
They will never be satisfied because they are a movement of aggrieved people that will always have an issue, whether it's like how the Republican Party made a huge thing about Cracker Barrel. When was the last time the Democratic Party was like, hey, yeah, this might not be the most important thing, but people are behind this, so let's do it.
Right. Or even the Sydney Sweeney thing.
Yeah, like I think that they are failing us, whether it's the Democratic Party, whether it's, the quote unquote liberal media who, is having people on that are, directly connected to hate groups to basically be said, oh, well, they're an immigration think tank, so they're the experts on this. We're they know that as they're trying to break down people's trust in experts, as the Republican Party is promoting this anti-intellectualism, in a way, they're trying to build their own vanguard, whether it's, through Peter Thiel and all these other, shadow groups. They don't want to completely get rid of experts. They want experts in a media class that agrees with them.
And then it's further compounded upon. It's further ironic when we look back to the chorus thing, right? It's you have this effort by Democrats to fund their own messaging. And then liberals are upset for being called out on it.
Yeah, the whole, well, isn't this what you wanted? It's like, did you even ask us, or did you assume? Did you say, oh, well, we lost the last election strictly based because we didn't have enough people online, and we are never going to outpace the Republicans' propaganda arm, and we're not going to do it better than them because they live in a world of fantasy. Their base is less reality based. They're more religious. They're less likely to have higher education. And we know those things lead to more conspiracism, more conspiracy thinking, magical thinking, belief that, with RFK Jr. with blue methylene, that, hey, this is gonna solve all my problems. This is gonna keep me nice and clean.
He's gonna find a solution for autism.
Yeah, he's finding it by making a national registry. Oh God,
there's nothing nefarious about that.
Nothing nefarious, nothing eugenicist whatsoever. That's the thing, is they refuse. There's concrete examples that these people refuse. They say, hey, we don't want to be alarmist, but hey, these mass deportations are going to lead to it's going to target American citizens.
Yep.
It is going to lead to an ethnic cleansing.
We've already seen citizens be deported.
Yep.
And then be underplayed.
Yeah, and say well, with the Kilmar Abrego Garcia example, yes, not of legal status, but they're going to use that same excuse of, oh, it was an oopsie and we already sent him. You want us to waste the plane of
you want us to bring a murderer back?
Yeah, as if, hey, we don't endorse murder whatsoever, even though, Donald Trump Jr., when Nancy Pelosi's husband got attacked, was reposting people that were glorifying that violence.
And then, speaking of violence against politicians, you had the Democrats in Michigan that were shot.
Yep.
And then what was the dominant narrative? He was actually a Democrat operative because he had BLM flyers in his car.
Yeah, it was the No Kings. They said, he had the No Kings protest. Oh, Tim Walz reinstated him even though he was initially put on, I forget what it was. He was appointed by a Republican, and Tim Walz wasn't going to ruffle any feathers and appoint his own person, so he just allowed that person to be reappointed.
Yeah.
within we briefly went on this tangent about conspiracism. I want to shed some light a little bit of, now that they can't prove that Kilmar Abrego Garcia is a human trafficker, is a terrorist, is, this, that, and the other thing. Now we're seeing the furthest fringes, which I don't even know if I would necessarily describe as a fringe, because how many people were involved in the QAnon movement, making appearances on those stages, not explicitly mentioning Q, but doing all of the same sort of tactics of, well, we're just asking questions. That, that sort of conspiracism is strong, not only just in American society, but within the MAGA base. And I'm seeing now that like QAnon people are saying, well, we can't necessarily prove Kilmar Abrego Garcia is a gang member or a human trafficker
or a kitty diddler.
Yeah. However, I think that last accusation, the QAnon base would go wild for. They would be like, yes, actually, he's drinking their blood for adrenochrome. He's a Democrat.
Speaking of conspiracies,
he's a Democrat operative.
He killed who are they saying he
now
killed?
They're trying to tie it to the Seth Rich conspiracy, which, as we mentioned earlier, how victims are used by the Trump movement. That family even asked, "Hey, can you please stop talking about this? We don't think the Clintons killed this." I think he was I'm not exactly sure. He might have been a DNC employee or working for the Democratic Party. But they refuse, and this goes back to even during Clinton. I forget who it was, but there was a Clinton advisor that committed suicide. And rather than being like, "Oh, was this person depressed?" They're like, "No, he was murdered."
Yeah. Yep.
Hell, Donald Trump even said that about Scalia. Said Scalia was suffocated.
Well, and this kind of like, I think this might be a good place to just touch briefly on like Israel. So I don't know if you saw this, but there was an interview, or it wasn't an interview. It was an announcement that Netanyahu was making. It was some kind of address to like President Trump, where he was implying that Iran was behind the assassination attempts.
Yes.
It's like, where does this conspiracism end?
I don't know if it necessarily does, because, I think I've been doing some research on my own. It's like
without me?
With the decentralization of information with the internet, the most salacious claims often have the most search results.
Right.
Like, you can go from various different conspiracy theories, and maybe Google has somewhat refined its search platform. However, it is concerning that you can still look and try to find conspiracies, and most of the top hits are going to be websites confirming that conspiracy. People want to believe in a world that is, and I think in a way there was this sort of like, I think there unfortunately is an amalgamation of conspiracism that is right and left. Like the anti-vaccine movement, I think, is a great example, because there were a lot of new age people that didn't trust pharmaceutical companies for very valid reasons, with the opioid epidemic. There are nefarious, actors within the pharmaceutical companies, but then that gets manipulated, and it, shit, even Kamala was saying like, "Oh, I'm not going to take the vaccine because, Trump's FDA authorized it," which is like, okay, there's more validity to that, in the sense that, we know that under Trump's FDA, there were a lot of rollbacks of public protections. However, you're playing into that, like, I hate to use these terms, and I think I would even be willing to like make an episode like combating like the blue MAGA, blue Anon, However, there is a contingent of the American population that are, I would say, more liberal leaning than like leftists, that now are saying, hey, if it's that American ethos of, if you're allowed to believe, for example, the 2020 election was stolen, I'm allowed to believe that the assassination attempt was staged and Donald Trump planned to have that, that 18-year-old that shoot just mere like inches away from his head. Like that child was trained by Iran, or the Trump administration trained him to be that well of a shot. Like,
well, one thing to point out is like, hey, somebody actually died at that.
Yep. And to say that, like, oh yeah, how is that not playing into, the Alex Jones type of crisis actors? Nobody really died.
Right.
And, granted that firefighter that died, I don't think I have any remorse for him. If you could find, people found his social media, he was saying a bunch of crazy shit in reference to Muslims, in reference to Israel and Palestine, like not a great human, but I don't think he deserved to die.
Right.
However, like, we saw Donald Trump like basically praise him afterwards, basically being like, and he was essentially somewhat like, not to the extent that Ashley Babbitt is now, but was temporarily made a martyr.
Yep.
Which I don't know if you've noticed, but Ashley Babbitt's gonna get like a military funeral.
Yep, I saw that.
And that's the whole thing, is like, I think whether it's the Kilmar Abrego case, whether it's, the 2020 election conspiracy, like the Stop the Steal whole thing, they are, the Republican Party under Trump's leadership and the MAGA movement are playing into...
They're playing for keeps.
Absolutely. They're playing for total victory, and anything other than that is seen as concession, is seen as being a traitor to the cause.
And I just kind of want to touch back when you're talking about Blue MAGA really quick. It's literally like, so to see the Republicans not play like in a real world and then be like, okay, well, we can do that too. It's literally just to concede like any systemic material analysis, right? It's basically just to say, we don't need to make the case. And again, it just comes back to what you said earlier. Like, we can't outplay Republicans at their game. And we shouldn't be trying to either. We shouldn't want to play that game.
Yeah, we shouldn't be like, oh, well, they won. And I think it goes to this point of the Democrats looking every 2 to 4 years. How do we win the next election? Republicans, as we were making the point of 30 years ago, they started this project.
Yep.
Hell, even like 35, 40 years ago,
Thanks, Newt Gingrich.
Yeah. Pat Buchanan.
Yep.
All of these characters. Pat Buchanan never won elected office. However, he was able to change the...
he changed the fabric of politics.
Absolutely. And was able to, sort of change the Republican status quo, like even under, a Ronald Reagan, even under George W. Bush, like, hey, these immigrants should have a pathway to citizenship. And here's the thing, which is really interesting. Like, Americans want, like, they believe that they should be able to believe contradictory things. They should be able to be in favor of mass deportations while simultaneously thinking, oh, it should be an easier pathway to citizenship.
But those are fundamentally opposed.
Yep. And it's this, I want to term it as like, it's a squishiness. Like, the liberal establishment is so malleable that they can then, like, they're not able to say, like, the Republican Party has gone cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs. Like,
the moment they did, right, when Kamala first started her campaign and she and Walz started the whole weird thing, primarily Walz, but I'll credit both of them. And just as quickly, they'd be like, nope, we've got to be nice to Republicans.
Or even like during Biden's term when he gave that address
Yep.
and called them semi-fascists.
Yeah, we talked about that last episode.
Yeah, I think that is worthy of, a reminder of that. Even barely stepping outside of like this focus group, poll tested, like,
Finger to the wind.
yeah, like if we step out slightly outside of that, we see, as we mentioned last episode with David Hogg, you step outside of that orthodoxy, you are going to be punished. That we are adopting the same tactics as MAGA of disagreement is treason, that there's not a need for a multi-pronged attack, that there's not a need for a coalition of even, oh, God forbid, leftists? Oh, a social democrat like Mom Donnie?
Sorry, I think you mean to say the other enemies of liberals.
Yeah, yes, absolutely. They're outright saying it. The left is supposed to concede to the reasonable liberals, but they're outright saying, hey, there's no room for them. They need to go make their own party.
Yep.
Fuck them. What they want is unreasonable.
And never mind that liberals are not being reasonable. Expecting us to rally behind Gavin Newsom is not reasonable.
And it's the projection of, hey, you don't get on board with Kamala, you don't get on board with Biden. You don't want Biden to stay in. Okay? And you don't get on board with Kamala. You're not going to get on board with Gavin Newsom. And I think they get exasperated, and it's never a sincere like, what do you want? It's more of like what you want is not attainable. We're going to be called socialist commies. And it's like, that's what happened either way. So stop being afraid.
And the thing is, like, the entire irony of this is liberals will look at leftists and be like, well, you're not being realistic. You're not being practical here. And the thing is, the liberal desire for all this to be coherent is way more of a fantasy than just changing the game.
Yeah, outright saying like, hey, the board has been completely flipped over by Republicans since, hell, even the civil rights movement. And we're not going to keep playing by the rule. There is no referee. We're not going to be the referee and be like, well, what MAGA wants is unreasonable, but also what the left wants is unreasonable. So, at this current stage, it very much looks like to your average voter or people that aren't necessarily politically in tune that the liberal establishment under the Democratic Party is more about what they're not. We're not leftists. We're not Trump. We're not socialists like the left and Trump. Rather than providing a different outlook of how things can be different. Like, I don't necessarily think that they were making a great argument of, hey, how are you going to bring down the price of groceries? Kamala's means-tested policy platform was like, well, if you're from a HBCU and like you open like a business for like 3 years in a predominantly underserved community, then maybe like your student loans could be forgiven, but only if you meet all of these certain criteria, versus just being like, hey,
maybe groceries should be cheaper.
Yeah. Oh, God forbid, and that's the thing is like some of the times the Democratic Party was able to say like, hey, it seems like these, big giant grocery chains are colluding with one another. They're afraid to conspiracize when it comes to that. They're fully willing to conspiracize when it has no threat to capital.
Right.
They're fully ready to conspiracize about, the Trump assassination. They're fully willing to conspiracize about the Trump vaccine. There's no video aspect, but I did air quotes about, making the vaccine his. And that plays right into his playbook of like, yeah, I saved the country.
Yep.
And it's totally your right whether or not you want to take it. But if you do, it could potentially help you. I'm not saying whether it is or not, but it's your freedom.
I think just to kind of wrap up here with like Kilmar Abrego Garcia, we have to stop looking at this entire situation and saying democracy's holding, because that's not what's happening. What the Kilmar Abrego Garcia case is showing us is how much it's fraying at the edges, how much it's already frayed, how much it has been fraying for 30 years, 40, 50 years since freaking Ronald Reagan. Like we are not in a functional state of democracy, and Democrats are just trying to manage the decline.
Yeah, and I think that, portraying themselves. I think in this last election, they were like, we are going to save democracy by doing the same shit that we've been doing for however long, like, whenever you want to decide that starting point, like they believe that by listening to the donors, that's actually going to save democracy versus like, even Trump has been able to position himself as further left than the Democrats on certain issues. Like, for example, saying, yeah, the Democrats say that they like democracy, but how about Bernie getting screwed, you know? And that definitely plays to a disaffected leftist cohort that might be more willing to vote for, like, that's the thing, is the Republican Party knows the less people that vote, the better their chances at winning.
Yep.
And, that is evident in this last election. That was evident in the 2016 election. If you put up a candidate that, hell, can't even go to bat for, like, hey, maybe Kilmar Abrego Garcia is not a criminal terrorist, or, people that, hey, have overstayed their visa, maybe we should, give them a pathway to citizenship, which is broadly popular. That is going to be portrayed as open borders.
Yep.
Even refuting that is not enough. So at this point, start looking to the people, lead the people, be of the people, rather than, hey,
of the donors,
of what's gonna win the next election.
Look, Magnus, we just need to give them 30 more years to consolidate power, and then things will be fine.
Yeah, and then we'll figure out what to do about all these existential problems like climate change. Like, hey, like if we just need to really have a public-private partnership with ExxonMobil and just really come to the table. They're not our enemies. We wouldn't want to, anyone to think that they might be our class enemies. No. Like, if anything, the Republicans are being too unreasonable. Like, I think it goes back to that point that we were making of, like, a great example of how out of touch the Democrats are. Hey, maybe we could flip Elon. Hey, maybe he could just come back and things can go back to normal. Or, like, I think there's this sentiment broadly of, like, oh, if we could just go back to normal. Like, that was the whole thing of the Biden administration, build back better, but, like, fundamentally nothing's going to change. We're going to go back to normal. And normal wasn't working. That's why Trump was elected the first time and the second time. It
hasn't worked. It didn't work. It won't work.
Yeah.
The status quo is not sustainable.
And they're going to fucking kick and scream and hold their breath and say, it's the leftists' fault. Mm-hmm. If only the leftists would build a coalition with us.
It's your fault, or it's not Kamala's fault for being a Zionist. It's our fault for not voting for the right Zionist.
Yeah. And hey, we're not in favor of quote unquote mass deportations, but some deportations need to happen. And
but Trump isn't deporting as much as Biden did, or as much as Obama did.
Yeah, and
so aren't we really for, like, I don't think you could draw any other conclusion than that Democrats like mass deportation.
Well, and they refuse to keep giving Trump ammunition to attack them from their left, because no matter what you say, I think that is one skill he does have, is recognizing there is a fracture between the left and the liberals. Even though we would be more inclined to vote for the Democratic Party, he's saying, what are they giving you? And right. Hey, people that are maybe more independent, or hell, even like people on the accelerationist left, he's saying, what do you have to lose? Things are shitty anyways.
Oh yeah, well, no, 100%. And don't even get me started on accelerations.
I think that could be, a topic for another day. But yeah, I'm fine with ending here. I think if there's anything else, is there anything else you would like to say?
No.
In reference to the Kilmar Abrego Garcia?
I think I pretty much said what I need to. Sorry to break it to you folks. The courts are not holding the line here. And we need to kind of break that liberal fantasy.
Yeah. In a way, it is our own form of conspiracism of, like, oh, well, the institutions will hold up as they're under, like, they recognize that they're under attack, and for some reason they believe that it's just gonna it's the modern world. Of course they're like, rationality will win out inevitably when we're seeing that that's evidently not the case.
Right.
I do